Welcome to Immanuel's 2021 Legacy Conference. We are so glad that you're joining us for this very important meeting. Whether you're a member of Immanuel or you're just joining us for the conference, we believe that what we talk about during this conference is going to impact generations to come. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rusty Hart. I'm honored to be the pastor for 55 plus adults here at Immanuel and also your host for this Legacy Conference. You know, one of the blessings, I think we can call it that, of COVID is that it gives us time to think and to prepare for things that are coming up in the days ahead. When you combine that with the beginning of our brand new 55 plus ministry, known as Legacy Ministries here at Immanuel, it is a very unique opportunity for us right now. You see, we can begin to build legacies that will impact the future for generations to come. We do it by thinking about it day by day, month by month, and year by year, laying in those foundational principles into our lives so that others see them and will try to emulate them. So many people wait until they're at the last days of life before they start even thinking about their legacy. And really at that point, there's not much you can do. So what a great blessing it is to each of us that we can begin thinking about our legacies right now beginning with this conference. Someone said to me recently that the best way to leave a legacy and the most important legacy is not thinking of something that we leave for someone, but something that we leave in someone. And that really is what we're about. And it's why we're here at this conference. This first session is going to be led by Dr. Don Moore. Don is no stranger to Immanuel. He's a member in our fellowship, and we're so thankful for him. He's also a former pastor, former executive director of the Arkansas Baptist State Convention. But more importantly, he's a fabulous man of God who is true and faithful to God's word and a tremendous Bible teacher. And so we're so excited tonight to have him sharing with us on the topic, the importance of building a godly legacy into my life. I cannot wait to see what he's going to say, and I hope that it's something that's going to impact you for years to come. You know, the truth is we're all building a legacy. It just may not be the legacy that we're intending to build. I heard a story about a grandfather whose granddaughter was visiting, and he decided that he really wanted to invest in her life. So every night, as they would get ready for bed, he shared a little story with her. And he would say a little poem that sounded something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the good girls go to heaven. When they get there, they will say, we love Jesus every day. He just wanted her to love Jesus like he did. Well, one night he was walking by her room and he heard her doing her own version of that poem. It just sounded a little bit different. And she said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the grandpas go to heaven. When they get there, they will say, golf, 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 golf every day. Not exactly the legacy he meant to leave. But you know, we are so blessed that we have this opportunity to begin thinking about our legacies and building them each and every day. The truth is, we're writing our legacies every day that we live, and we need to be thinking about them. As we begin this process in this conference, would you join me in prayer as we ask God's blessings about what we're going to do? Dear Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity to learn from wise, godly leaders. And we just pray that you would speak to our hearts, clear all distraction from us, and help us to focus on your word and your plan for our lives as we think about the way that our lives impact the generations to come. Lord, help us see clearly the importance and the value in building a godly legacy. Amen.
In my quiet time this morning, and as I was just reading some different scriptures, the Lord just seemed to give me one that just hit me right between the eyes. And I just thought, oh, this is what I want to always remember. And it's David speaking in Psalm 71. And he said, oh God, you have taught me from my youth, and to this day I declare your wondrous works. Now also, when I am old and gray-headed, O God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation, your power to everyone who is to come. That is so important, that we declare his strength to this generation and his power to all the generations to come. Doesn't that speak to you? It really does to me.
I think it's really, really important to leave a godly legacy behind because, I can still envision myself sitting on an old mimosa tree on the back porch of my grandmother's house. And I can remember saying to her, her name was, we called her Mammy. Mammy, I want to make sure I go to heaven. And she was the person that I knew I could talk to about that. She was the truly godly influence in my life. And I remember her telling me exactly, what I needed to do to go to heaven, to be saved. I remember sitting exactly in that tree, and I'll be forever grateful for her. And again, I just want to be that person to my grandkids also.
Well,
Mike gets choked up telling this story, but his dad, his granddad got cancer and was dying.
Daddy Bob.
Daddy Bob, that's right.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bob and my dad and Jimmy Karam drove down to the Stuttgart Hospital to see his dad, Mike's dad, who had not been coming to church in a long time. And he was so impressed that 3 men that he hardly knew would drive down on a work night to the hospital and see him. That shortly thereafter,
He started coming. Dr. Vault did the Sunday afternoon Bible studies before church.
Yes, that's right.
And he started coming to that, and pretty soon he joined and he was baptized.
Leaving a godly legacy is vitally important. Pastor just got done with a study in Hebrews, and it's at least my 3rd time through it. And when you really study Hebrews 12, I think it is, he talks about that great cloud of witnesses that you press on because of those who have gone before you, have modeled the way before you, and you say, have I modeled the way? Do I reflect the love of Jesus Christ? Would I respond to every situation in my life like Jesus would? Obviously, I don't, but I have a mark in the future. I've got a focus point for my race, as Paul would say, to stay in the Hebrews, that I could stay in that lane and I could focus on the author and perfecter of my faith.
I dreamed of a city called Glory, so bright and so fair. As I entered the gates, I cried, angels all met me there. They carried me from mansion to mansion. Oh, the sights I saw. But I said, I want to see Jesus, the one who died for all. Then I bowed on my knees and cried, I cried, holy, thou art holy. I clapped my hands and they took me down the streets of heaven. Oh, the scenes too many to tell. I saw Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, talked with Mark and Timothy. Oh, but I said, I want to see Jesus, 'cause he's the one who died for me. Then I bowed on my knees and cried, holy. I cried, holy, thou art holy. I clapped my hands and sang glory. Oh, I clapped my hands and sang glory. Yes, I clapped my hands and sang glory. Glory to the Son of God.
Well, I am so thrilled that Rusty has planned this legacy event for us. I mean, this is really down my line. Since I'm 87 years old, I ought to be thinking a little bit about legacy, huh? And I'm sure you are too. But you know, the truth is, as I look back over the influence of my mom and dad, I don't think they ever thought about their legacy. They just did what they knew was right before God, and as a result, they just ended up with a legacy. So I'm not thinking that what we're going to be saying to you in these days is going to cause you to become intentional about a program of developing legacy. The point is, if you do right by God and obey Him, you're going to have a legacy. You don't have to worry about that. Now, at this point, you may have a good legacy, or you may think, well, my legacy's not too good. So maybe the conference will give you some ideas of what you can do to finish strong. But the other thing is, you need to know that your legacy may be good to this point. But if you come to a time in your life when you really mess up, you can really mess up a beautiful legacy if you just kind of lose control of yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, because circumstances for us at this point in life can become trials sometime. You know, David must have thought a lot about being old. He talked about being old and gray-headed. This is in Psalm 71. And he said, I am old and gray-headed. O God, forsake me not until I have showed thy strength unto this generation and thy power to everyone that is to come. So at that point, David realized that his life was about over. And then he got to thinking, you know, I have a responsibility to this generation, but not just to them, but to the generations that are to come as well. In Psalm 92, David talked about this, and he said, even in their old age, talking about where we are now, they will stay fresh, bearing luscious fruit and abiding faithfully. With pleasure, they still proclaim, you're so good. This is older people talking about God. You're so good. You're my beautiful strength. You've never made a mistake with me. That's in Psalm 92. So the point is, the way we live our lives is the greatest legacy. Sometimes we think about our legacy as being leaving jewelry to a granddaughter, or, you know, maybe a man's guns he leaves to his grandson. Those are bequests, of course, and those are nice, but we're talking about something different from that. We're talking about what you leave as a result of your the way you have lived. Now, sociologically, you hear people talk about the greatest generation. Well, I was kind of born during that time. I was born in 33, and the greatest generation fought the Second World War. So I was in the third grade when all that started happening. But the legacy of that generation is their courage, their bravery, and the price they paid for our country. That was the greatest generation. Now, we're in a different generation. And I was interested. I heard a millennial yesterday on television talking about his generation, and he said that Time magazine has done an article on the millennials, and he said that they are the most narcissistic, the most entitled, the most awarded, the most healthy, the most diverse, the most educated, the most tech savvy, with the greatest expectations. And I would have to kind of add to that because they've lived so much in a fantasy world, with little regard for reality and tradition and consequences, it may be that their expectations are a little bit harder to live up to than we might think. Well, I'm talking about what lives on after we are gone. Now, Webster's Dictionary gives the definition like this: legacy is something transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past. In other words, it's a bequest. It's the stewardship of our influence that carries on after we're gone. There are a lot of Bible examples about it. Probably the best one is given in Hebrews 11. Of course, that's the faith chapter. And all of that's about the legacy of all those great people. But it speaks of Abel there, and it says that he being dead yet speaketh. In other words, that was his legacy. What he did continues to speak even in our day. So the question could be asked, after you're gone, after I'm gone, what will our lives continue to be saying? So that's what we're talking about. Legacy is what your life is still speaking after you are gone. Now, some bequests, they're pretty formal. There may even be a ceremony. But the legacy we leave, it's not formal, it isn't ceremonial, it isn't a legal transaction. It's just what happens. Now, yours may be recorded until the third and fourth generation, the Bible says. So we need to be very careful about our legacy. The question might be, well, how deep is my legacy? How lasting is my legacy? How extensive is my legacy? And how beneficial are the matters of my legacy? Last week I took off the internet Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech. I was interested in his legacy as reflected in that speech. You can think about that being a strong legacy. Now, another legacy, and this is not something we're comfortable talking about, but President Donald Trump, had a great legacy of many great things he did, but in his last days, his legacy may have changed, see? And so we need to be careful right up to the very end of our life about how we're living and what we are doing with our lives. Now, rest assured, you may not think your life is very significant, but you will be remembered. You do have a legacy. Now, some of what will be remembered about you may be very shallow. For instance, someone may remember that the way you sat and twisted your hair all the time. Somebody else may think about how you bit your fingernails. You know what I'll remember about my last wife? Something that was really unusual. She was a fanatic about the bills in the billfold being turned right. I mean, they all had to be turned the way. They needed to be in proper sequence. And so if she looked in my billfold and they were out of sequence, she would say, well, no wonder you have trouble making change when you're checking out. So she said, if you would keep these things straight. So all of us have some quirks about our personality. A lot of people would say, well, that's just OCD or something like that. Some people were remembered for the way they're devoted to their hobbies. Some people remembered for their love of material things. Some people will be remembered by their preoccupation with their appearance. They're just always real ticky about their appearance. And so we will be remembered. We need to always keep that in mind. Now, we'll not only be remembered by shallow things, we'll be remembered by deep things. I asked a few people to answer some questions for me, kind of in preparation for this. And one of the couples that I asked to respond about what they thought they would be remembered for, one girl said, she's a pastor's wife, she said, I remember so well every morning seeing my mom at the breakfast table When we got up, she was already at the breakfast table reading her Bible. So there are deep things you'll be remembered for. You'll be remembered if they know that you had regular devotions. They'll be remembering you for having been faithful in church attendance. They'll remember you for godly behavior. They'll remember you for the way you love spiritual things. So like I said, there are things that are shallow about our life that will stay on in people's minds, and then there are things that are deep about our life. I think that we should remind ourselves that God expects us to have a spiritual legacy. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, that's the passage that contains the Shema, in which the Israeli people were taught about what you're to say. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. He said, these commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Now that's personal. Impress them on your children. And then the question comes up, well, how are we supposed to impress them on the children? He tells you. He says, talk about them when you sit at home. He says, when you walk along the road, talk about it. When you lie down and when you get up, talk about it. Put the truths of God in jewelry. He said, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses. Well, that's your furnishings. Even your furnishings can have a carryover spiritual legacy even there. And it's not so much what we say, it's what they see us doing that's going to carry over. It's kind of like the old saying, it's more caught than taught. So this is something we need to also understand. And I want to share another scripture there. In Psalm 71, he says, do not cast me away when I'm old, do not forsake me when my strength is gone. He said, since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. So now here's something that becomes pretty apparent. With the Jewish people, every time they wanted to tell their kids something about the greatness of God, you know what they did? They had to go all the way back to the parting of the sea to get them out of Egypt, or the parting of the Jordan River. It seemed like they never had anything great to tell about God except those old things. So the question is, in your legacy, in your story of your walk with God, what do you have? What do you have in your memory bank that you would tell your kids and your grandkids about the greatness and the strength and the deeds and might of God? I think we need to acknowledge that legacy can be something simple or something profound. It can be something costly or something that's not very costly. Let me give you an example. Your legacy may be formed as a result of something as simple as you singing hymns while you're doodling around the kitchen. But the kids know you're always singing about God. It could be something that simple or as profound as seeing you every day reading the Bible. It could be something as simple as your faithful attendance at church, but it may be as profound as you going to somebody that you've gotten crossways with and you making peace, making right relationships. So, man, that impresses your kids that you're willing to do that. So it may be simple, it may be profound. It may be as simple as just having the blessing every time you sit down at mealtime, or it may be as profound as going down the street to witness to somebody and share the plan of salvation with someone. It may be as simple as just fixing a dish for a needy family, or it may be as profound as seeing your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather going through the grave, serious loss of a spouse. See, whatever we're doing, it may be simple, it may be profound. Now, here's something else you need to keep in mind. The kids pay attention to what we talk about so much. They pay attention to how we spend our time and how we spend our money. For instance, my kids and my stepchildren knew that Anita loved the Arkansas Baptist Children's Home Ministry. So a part of her legacy is that. Now what happens is at Christmas time, instead of giving gifts, they send a gift there in memory of her. So that's a part of her legacy. It's where you put your money. It's what you talk about. It's what you give your time to. So that's your legacy. I want to read you something from Psalm 78 that has to do with legacy. I just think it's one of the neatest things. And you need to understand that I'm reading from a newer translation. Actually, it's a paraphrase. It's called the Passion Translation. Listen to this. We've heard true stories from our fathers about our rich heritage. We will continue to tell our children and not hide from the rising generation the great marvels of our God, His miracles and power that have brought us all this far. The story of Israel is a lesson in God's ways. He established decrees for Jacob and established the law in Israel, and He commanded our forefathers to teach them to their children. For perpetuity, God's ways will be passed down. That's legacy. From one generation to the next, even to those not yet born. In this way, every generation will have a living faith in the laws of life and will never forget the faithful ways of God. Man, isn't that rich? In other words, God says, I know what I can count on. I can count on my children, leaving a legacy through their children and through their grandchildren. Now, for some of you, that might not be too much of a challenge, but when Nita and I married, we had 5 children, 15 grandchildren, and in December, I added number 24 and 25 great-grandchildren. And this last week, I added number 26 and 27. Oh, you're wondering how in the world these great-grandkids are born so fast. Well, actually, our granddaughter in New Jersey and her husband just adopted twins last week, and so that added number 26 and 27. So I have the potential for a vast legacy through all of these people. Now, God wants us to finish strong, and that's what we need to kind of close out this time talking about. And to finish strong, we're going to have to guard our emotions because there are a lot of things that impact our emotions. You see, negativism or depression or discouragement, that can really mess up an otherwise good legacy. So let's talk about that a little bit. I read a passage of Scripture this morning in Psalms 106, number 25. It says, they grumbled and found fault with everything and closed their hearts to God's voice. Whoa! That's where you are. We kind of, as we get older, it's easier for us to find fault and criticize and so forth. But you see, that's going to nullify, that's going to cancel out your legacy. So we have to be really, really careful about that. Now, 2 things I'm going to say about this. First of all, feelings can really mislead us. Feelings can really mislead us. When David was going through all of this business of getting older and all, he talked about God forsaking him. He knew better than that. He said, God, please don't make me a castaway when I'm... He knew better than that. He knows better than anybody that God's made promises He's not going to leave him. And yet his feelings, his emotions. Now, folks, that is really something we have to deal with. And you need to know that's going to impact the way people remember you. He said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid what man can do. Now, the things that impact our feelings have to do with health issues, of course. When our energy is drained, when social activities are curtailed, like with the pandemic, or even disability maybe keeps you from having circulation in society, you're not as active. When opportunities for service and ministry are less, you begin to think, well, who am I? Am I of any value to anybody? Or we may see that the things we used to do, somebody else is doing it. They're younger than we are. They may be doing it better than we did. But we begin to have this feeling that we're not needed and that we don't need anybody anymore. So, you know, when my first wife was dying from cancer, I was one day working, just thinking about all the emotions going through this. And I wrote a pretty long poem on Just for a Moment. I want to read you one little stanza out of that, talking about how feelings can mislead you. Listen to this. Feeling is fickle and logic is vain when called on to help us in periods of pain. They mean so well in their solemn involvement, but they have little to add in such a moment. So you need to watch your feelings and not let your emotions get away from you. Second thing, you need to just deal with facts. The facts are that we're losing physical vitality. There are a lot of things we can't do that we used to do and enjoyed doing. We need to learn to rejoice in what we can do. There are a lot of things I can't do, but what I can do is so fulfilling. And so I just feel like whatever losses I have sustained are offset by the gains that I have gained. Now, in accepting our physical limitations, though, we have to be really careful that we don't feel like we're being cheated, that God's depriving us of something that He owes us, and He doesn't owe us anything. And when you come to dealing with limitations physically, as we get older, you get to thinking now, spiritual life and influence are not dependent upon physical power and presence. In other words, the impact of your life is not dependent upon physical strength and your presence. You discover the goodness and the glory of unseen things when you can no longer be involved in the seen things. A good example would be Johnny Erickson Tata. How limited she is, but my stars, what a ministry she has. So just keep in mind, as long as you're still breathing, you still have a ministry. It's just not like it has been. So, I'll ask a question. What will you leave behind so far as your spiritual legacy is concerned? And I'm going to give you some ideas and examples now, okay? I think one of the things that we need to do is realize how powerful our family relationships, our home may be. Now, so far as my kids are concerned, and, I never set out to establish a legacy. I've just tried to do what God called me to do. But there was a time when an atheist lady enrolled her child in our Sunday school when I was pastoring a church in New Orleans. Her husband was injured in an accident shortly after we became acquainted with her. She not only was an atheist, had grown up an atheist, but she was a spiritualist and had all kinds of posters and dark lights and everything in her home. We just got the creeps when we went in her home. And one day, her husband called from the hospital and asked us to take her in, an atheist woman. And in learning her story while she was staying with us, she had been a prostitute in California, Florida, and was brought to New Orleans to be a prostitute. And what had happened, she'd gotten put in jail in Orleans Parish Prison along with her husband. And during that period of time, she started reading a Gideon Testament. And through that, she began to think, there might be something to Christianity. Well, anyway, we took that atheist lady in our home, and that made an impression upon our children. Then we went to Fort Smith to pastor there, and one day a lady in white walked in my office and laid down on my desk a 3-month-old little boy. And she said, "Here, he's yours." I said, "No, ma'am, he is not mine. And you will take him out of here, or I will call the police and have you arrested." I didn't know what she was accusing me of. Maybe she was going to start a paternity suit or something like that. So I just had my initial reaction. I said, after we had visited a while, I said, "Let me call my wife, and we'll talk." So we talked about it, and we took Mary in and her little boy, Stephen. We kept the boy and the mother for several months while she was deciding whether to adopt him out or not. She eventually adopted him out. So my kids, once again, saw that our home was a place where God ministered. Then one day a pastor called me and said, "My boy is on scholarship to West Stark Community College, and it doesn't pay for his room and board. Would you ask somebody in your church if they have a spare bedroom that he could stay with them for this semester?" I said, "Well, let me get back with you, Jack." It was Jack Porter. So I called him back after I talked to my wife, and my wife and I decided we wanted Tim, his son, to stay with us. So we took care of a preacher's kid for a semester. Well, the next thing you know, a Trans Am, this was a powerful Pontiac sports car several years ago, pulled up in front of the house one Saturday morning, and out of it came this woman that I recognized. It was a preacher's kid. And she walked in, and I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I need help, Brother Don." So I said, "Well, what's the deal, Connie?" And she said, "Well, I've been mud wrestling in the bars in Tulsa." And she said, "I've got to have help." And I said, "Well, whose car is that?" She said, "It belongs to an Arab student, an oil major here at the University in Tulsa. It belongs to him." So here was this preacher's kid. She was away from God, and we kept her for several months and helped her to get. So I'm not saying all this to brag on me. I'm saying that a legacy was being formed that was powerful with my children. Okay, so When Nita was sick, and I was spending most of my time in the room helping to care for her, one day I just said to the Lord, Lord, I know you expect me to serve you, and I don't know how I can serve you. And it was almost like he said, Don, what about your grandchildren? And I thought, well, what about my grandchildren? I'm stuck here at home. There's nothing I can do. And then it just dawned on me, you have all these grandsons. Now, by grandsons, I'm talking about grandsons and grandsons-in-law. And so I've forgotten how many there were at that time. But anyway, he said, why don't you invest in them? So for most of the 3 years Nita was sick, I every week would write to all of these grandsons, and I would write a scripture, and I would write some truths related to that scripture that would help them in their Christian walk as a Christian dad and a Christian husband. I called that Grand Truths for Grandchildren. So that's part of my legacy. Now, so those are just some ideas. Now, let me tell you the most prominent and powerful thing you can do in terms of legacy. Now, some of you know that in these later years, after I'd served the convention for a long, long time, and then I did the interim pastorates for a long time, that God put on my heart a calling to get senior adults to pray for revival and awakening. And actually, over a period of time, Nita and I went into 75 churches, 115 churches and 75 associations, and we had about 1,600 senior adults that committed to pray every day for revival and awakening. So I want to close out by telling you that may be the most powerful thing you have to leave a legacy. If your kids know that prayer is such a vital and important thing in your life. I'll never forget, my boy was pretty well through medical school, and one day he called and he said, Dad, I need you and Mom to really be praying tomorrow. I said, well, what's the deal? And he said, well, I have to do a 2-hour lecture, and I'm going to be lecturing to my professors and to all my peer students. And he said, you know, I'm a stutterer. Well, that's right. And so I thought, oh, may bless his heart. Okay, so we prayed and we prayed. So the next day he called and he said, well, thank you. I made it all the way through without a bobble. And so we were thrilled over that. This week, not a pastor, but a retired church staff person called me. Actually, he called on Sunday night and he said, Brother Don, I have to have you. I said, well, what's the deal, John? He'd been minister of education in my church in Fort Smith. He said, I have COVID. My wife has COVID. Our daughter's in Florida and she had to have a hip replacement. And my son is on staff at a church in Tulsa, and his wife just walked off and left him with three kids. He was so brokenhearted. And I thought after that was over, I'm so glad he felt confident in calling and asking me to pray. You know, Grand, Pop, that may be the greatest compliment to your spiritual legacy there is, that your kids trust you to pray for them. So I just want to talk to you about that. And here's something that's really been helpful to me. I just think that if there's some essential things that will help you to maintain a good prayer walk. First of all, you just need to dedicate time every day. You need to have a place that's dedicated to it. You need to have some prompts. By prompts, I'm talking about scriptures that you're going to read. It may be a devotional book. It may be hymns. In fact, there's some mornings when I wake up with a hymn going through my mind. And so as soon as I get up, I find the hymn book rather than the Bible, and God begins to speak to me. So those are what I'm calling prayer prompts. Then you need to kind of have a pattern as to the way you approach prayer. And the best pattern is just go by the Lord's Prayer. And then just have a plan for how you're going to go about it. Now, that doesn't mean you're legalistic. You're not hidebound to that. You're going to be flexible enough to make adjustments like last Saturday. I thought, now, I'm not going to follow my plan. This is going to be potpourri today. And so whatever I'm reading that brings up a scripture, I'm going to go to that scripture. And so I moved around, and actually I ended up spending nearly 4 hours just doing things like that. So it can be a lot of fun. And but another thing I think is really important is that you share about prayer. Now, that's not to brag about it. No. I don't know anybody that thinks they are a good prayer. Of all the ways in which we fall short, prayer may be the place where we most often fall short, but it shouldn't keep us from working at it and trying. And so the reason it's important to report about prayer is because these kids need to hear what Moses wanted Israel to hear, and that is that God did miraculous and wonderful, mighty, marvelous things. And it's not just 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. It's right now. That's what our kids want to know. Is he real now? What value is in the story that he rose from the dead and is alive if he's not alive and working now? So that's the reason you need to talk about prayer, and you need to also share about what's happening. Now, the other thing that has really helped me, and here's the way I want to talk about this. I found out my prayer list was getting so long that it just went on and on and on. It made me think of an older man one time in my church in Fort Smith, Mr. Law. I called on him to close out the service in prayer one time, and he said, he looked up at me just panicky, and he said, "Excuse me, preacher." I thought, oh my, I've embarrassed Mr. Law. I am so sorry. So he came up after the service and he said, "Preacher, would you come by the house this week?" He said, "I really do believe in prayer." So I went by his house that week, and as I walked in the front door, he told me to be seated over in the corner of the living room. And he was very specific, in that chair. Well, I sat down and he said, "Now, if you look to the left, and on the left wall were two long legal-sized sheets, and on those sheets were people's names. On the right side in the corner were two more sheets, and there were long lists of names on those sheets." And I glanced down through that sheet. I noticed he had Jeff and Cindy Moore. Well, when he joined the church, he asked what my kids' names were, Jeff and Cindy Moore. And here this old man was. He had been spending years praying for my children, and I didn't even know it. But he spent lots of time. I said, "Mr. Loy, how long does it take you to do that?" He said, "Sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours." But he said, "I just can't pray in public like you asked me to." I said, "I'm not worried about you praying in public. Thank you so much for praying in private like you have. Just keep it up." So what I'm saying is this: there needs to be a way to manage all these various requests. For instance, there are family needs, and like Thursday is the day I spend time just praying for my family. Well, I've got 44 of them now, so by the time I go through those, that takes a lot of time. I need to pray for people with illnesses, and so I have a long list of illnesses. I need to pray for the church personnel. And you know, we probably shouldn't ever lead a public prayer that we don't pray for our pastor and for the staff. These people have to have God's help. They can't operate in the power of human wisdom and ingenuity. They must have the creativity and the anointing and power of God. So let's pray for these people. You may just have one whole day that you do that. The other thing you may do is take some individual ministries. For instance, one of the first ministries God put on my heart was the ministry that Tracy Hogue does at the city center. I pray for that ministry. Another one is the Samaritan's Purse work that Franklin Graham. And you can go from there to the foreign missionaries, the home missionaries, to all kinds of ministries. So one day, just pray for ministries. Another thing you can do is to pray for people with special needs. Right now, I just have 2 people in prison, but I'm ministering to them as I write and as I share Scripture. One of them is from a home that's atheistic. He was put in prison, in federal prison, because of child pornography. And I've developed a good relationship, and he said to me not long ago in a letter, "If you have anything to give me that has to do, in the Scriptures," he said, "if you have anything to give me that has to do with guilt and shame, I would be glad to hear what you have to say." He just opened the door, so I was able to do that. Well, there's a day that I pray for him. And then another man that I pray for is in prison in Oklahoma, a state prison there, because of drug problems and a fight that he was in with his girlfriend, in which there was lots of bloodshed. So anyway, so I have a day for family, a day for ministries, a day for illnesses, a day for church personnel and programs, a day for immediate, critical, temporary issues. Yeah. Right now, I went back to look at my list for today, and there were 6 things on that. All of them are critical. And so on Saturday, this last Saturday, I did nothing but focus on praying on those immediate needs. And then, of course, you need a day that you just go over praises for what God has done for us. So all I'm saying is this: whether you want to take a day for each of these categories, or whether your list is not very long and you can pray for all of them in one day. In other words, categorizing your request has really been a helpful thing to me. Now, I want to mention to you one of the most powerful things about your legacy I don't want you to miss. I'll never forget, my boy was like in the 5th or 6th grade, so when he'd get out of school, he would come home and do his homework just as quick as he could, because we had Dr. Sidlow Baxter. He was a British preacher. He was in our church for a week. And Jeff knew that I was going to go pick up Dr. Baxter at the Ramada Inn and bring him to the church. He wanted so bad to be around Dr. Baxter. Now look, this is just a kid, but he wanted to be around this old man. So he'd get his homework done so he could go with me to the motel to pick him up. Now here's what I learned through that, and other things similar. And that is that your kids notice who you really admire, who you talk about, who you respect so greatly. And if you admire and respect and talk about all these secular people, people whose life orientation is to the world and sex and sin, you're not setting an example for your kids. They want to be like the people you admire and that you talk about. So you be sure that you have the right kind of models for them that you can then talk about there. And I want to give you a couple of good words from the scripture. There are 2 scriptures that I think will give you some encouragement. Psalm 22, verse 30 and 31. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. Talking about God. Psalm 112, verses 1 through 3. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who finds great delight in his commands. His children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Your legacy will be carried on through your children and your grandchildren. I love the way the Apostle John recorded, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, for they shall rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." Yeah. The way you've lived, the things that have been of value to you, that's what's going to follow you. That's your legacy.
Thank you so much, Don. Those words are so crucial to where we are and where we need to be. And so we thank you for sharing with us tonight. I hope that as you're watching this, that you are formulating some ideas of why it's important to build a godly legacy. That you're seeing that it's never too late to start building that legacy, and that we need to start doing it right now. Maybe you're like me and you're saying, you know what? God may have brought us together for this time, as the Bible says, for such a time as this, that we can encourage one another, equip one another, and build legacies that really will change the course of the future. Someone said to me that they see building a legacy in this way, kind of like a relay runner. You know, I pick up the baton and I run my race. And I try my best during my leg, knowing it's not going to be perfect, but to be effective and to make sure that I'm doing the best I can, in hopes that when I pass that baton off, the next runner will go much further than I ever could. I think that is such a great way to look at it, particularly as we think about those that we love the most, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and even those who will come beyond and hear the stories of how we lived our lives. I think it's so important that we run our race well and that we do a good job. I know that in my life, I am so very thankful for my family. I think about my grandfather, who was a model of Christian service. He had the kindness of the Lord. And you know, that laid a foundation for me that I wanted to serve others and I wanted to be the hands of Christ. I think about my grandmother And I think about all the ways that she invested in me, explaining the Word of God, teaching me songs that had those same truths in them. And I know how she prayed for me. And it taught me that I wanted to do the same with my children, to show them the importance of the Word of God and to lift them up in prayer at every chance. You know, on my desk in my office, I have my grandparents' Bibles. And it's so interesting to me to read through those Bibles time and time again and see the scriptures that meant a lot to them, that impressed them, that guided them in their lives. Also to see all the things that they thought were important to put in those Bibles, things that were clippings of me that I never knew they even had. It left such a legacy to me. I also think about my mother, a woman who showed me the practical side of life. She showed me how to make decisions. She showed me how to go through difficulties and come out on the other side. She taught me the importance of knowing a biblical foundation in your life so that you are grounded and you know exactly who you are, but also the importance of having wings so that you could fly. And she taught me how to fly beyond what I even thought was possible. You know, their legacy in my life taught me many lessons. I think more importantly, though, it continues to guide me. They're not with me anymore, but those lessons are. And they just guide me each and every day in everything that I do. As we think about those that we love, we want to shift our thinking to leaving a legacy to my family. And what a great leader we have coming to lead this session. Dr. Emil Turner, no stranger to Immanuel, a member of the Crenshaw Moore Sunday School class. He is a former pastor and former executive director of the Arkansas Baptist State Convention. It was there that I had the privilege to work for him and with him. And I can tell you he is a godly man who practices what he preaches. And he is going to lead us well. So for the next few moments, let's think about the legacies that we've received and that we are leaving to those that we love most.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not thy compassion, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be.
Sing together. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Sing the last verse. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth. Thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine.
people often think about leaving or receiving an inheritance. They think of that in terms of money and property and personal items of sentimental value. However, there's a much more important legacy that we as Christians are to leave to our children and our grandchildren. This legacy does not lie in the financial realm, but in the spiritual and emotional realms. I'm referring, of course, to a godly legacy that leaves a lasting spiritual imprint on the lives of our children that will bless them in this life and prepare them for eternity. I want to leave a spiritual legacy that's consistently Christ-like, that's genuine, that's heartfelt and passionate about the things of God. I want my grandchildren to know not only by what I say, but how I live my life, how important Jesus is to me, and pray that He will be to them also. Leaving behind a spiritual legacy of faith is the greatest gift we can pass on to the next generation.
When I think about my legacy to other people than my family, like the people that I've worked with all my life and the people that I try to serve through my Sunday school class, I want them first and foremost to know that Jesus is the most important thing that I can ever share anyone with, that I can always help people in accounting, but unless we stop and remember the bad, we don't appreciate the good sometimes. And that's so important with me, with my clients, to always say, do you know how good everything is? I want them to see the many good things that the Lord does before they think about the few upsets that they have in life.
It's good to see you this evening. Thank you for joining Immanuel Baptist Church by live stream for this Legacy Conference. I particularly want to greet the members of the Sunday School class of which I am a part, the Crenshaw Moore class. What a great blessing to be included in that Sunday School class, to share in the prayer requests. And while I haven't been in Little Rock in several months, participate in the class, I keep up with it through the prayer requests and join you in prayer on a weekly basis. It's an honor to get to be asked to do something about legacy, and I will tell you that I took the responsibility seriously. I found on a brief Google search of the word legacy that there are 830 million entries for legacy on a Google web search. The word legacy is a very popular word right now. Some might call it trendy, others would call it something of great interest, but it's very popular. Today it is generally referred to as that which is left behind to someone else. You leave a legacy when you are no longer present, a gift or an endowment or an inheritance. But that's not always been the use of the word. In fact, that's a relatively new use of the word legacy. The word legacy comes from a Proto-Indo-European language, and it was originally pronounced leg, as near as philologists can tell us, and leg as if one of your appendages with which you walk, but it did not mean something left behind. It meant something said. The Greek language took that Proto-Indo-European word, moved it into the Greek language for the word say, and therefore a young seminary student learning the Greek language for the first time begins to conjugate the verb say, lego, and he learns all the conjugated endings of it. The word legacy originally meant the gathering of words, not the gathering of resources or of assets, but the gathering of words. In the Middle Ages, the word legacy came to be used as a delegation of people who would go and meet with the delegation representing another emperor or another potentate, and these two delegations would conduct a legacy. Sometimes we use the term legation in English today to describe that event. But by the time the Renaissance arrived in the late 1600s, a new dimension to the word legacy had taken effect. And you find an unusual term. It's called legacy hunter. And that is the first time, the introduction of that phrase is the first time the idea of a set of assets are assigned to the concept of a legacy. A legacy hunter in the Renaissance was a person who attached himself or herself to an elderly person with wealth and assets. And they manipulated that person so that they would inherit those assets. Now, there is an important difference between the concept of an estate and a legacy. We think of an estate as the material or physical which is left behind, and legacy is something that's left behind, but it's not always material and physical. A good example of that is the death of John Wesley. Historians tell us that when John Wesley died, that his entire estate consisted of a few copper coins in his pocket and a few more copper coins in a bureau drawer in his home. He had a very meager estate, but John Wesley had a phenomenal legacy. According to historians, 135,000 people had been ushered into the kingdom by the ministry of John Wesley. That is the difference between a legacy and an estate. And a legacy is far more valuable than an estate and far more durable. I brought a picture for you, a great picture of what I believe describes a wonderful legacy. And I'll just tell you about this picture for a few moments because it's been a very moving picture for me. It's a picture painted in the 16th century, late 16th century, by the Italian master Barocchio. And Barocchio painted Aeneas fleeing the destruction of Troy after the Greek invaders used the Trojan horse to destroy the city. And there is the great king Aeneas. He is at center in the picture, and he's a powerful individual, a wise warrior, a valiant man with great credentials. And on his back is his father, Anchises. Anchises is also a great king, and he has left a legacy to his son, a legacy of wisdom, a legacy of valor and courage. And as Aeneas flees burning Troy, he carries his aged and crippled father, Anchises, on his back. But when you look at the picture, there in Aeneas' left hand, he holds his son Ascanius. Ascanius will also be a great king, a powerful leader. And there you have a wonderful picture of a legacy. A hero of Troy, fleeing the burning city, but so instructed and guided by his father that his father is being carried on his back. As it is, his father can speak into his ear. And there he's leading his young son, to whom he will impart a legacy. It is a beautiful picture of what a legacy is like. In Scripture, there are many legacies to families. And you could start early in the Bible with Abraham. Abraham leaves a unique legacy to his son Isaac. Remember what Abraham said at the base of Mount Moriah when he was about to take Isaac up and sacrifice him? Isaac said, "Father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" And what did Abraham say? He said, God will provide. What a legacy to leave to someone. There is another legacy in Noah. When we look at Shem and Ham and Japheth and their partnership with their father in constructing the ark and riding out the flood, they received a legacy from Noah. And that legacy was a legacy of being committed to do what God wanted them to do, regardless of the response of the lost world around them. In a world today, it would be hard to believe that Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth could build the ark. We think they'd be canceled out. We think that Weyerhaeuser wouldn't sell them lumber for the ark. We think that Home Depot wouldn't sell them the nail guns because they were taking action that seemed to run counter to cultural norms. But these sons of Noah received a tremendous legacy from their father. We can talk about Paul and Timothy. And Paul gives Timothy a legacy in 1 Timothy about leadership in a church. What a great legacy. And so many young preachers need a legacy like that of leadership in a church. And the central verses of 1 Timothy are that Paul says to Timothy, I hope to come to you soon, but I'm writing this letter so you will know how to lead the church. We could talk about Moses and his legacy to Israel. And we are so grateful for Moses' legacy. But because Moses' legacy, we have the written Word of God, the law of God written down to instruct us and guide us and shed light on our path. We could talk about John and his legacy with the church in Ephesus. And what he wrote to them in 1 John about how he rejoices to see his children walking in the truth and giving direction to the spiritual children about knowing the difference between right and wrong and light and darkness. What a tremendous legacy. Jesus' legacy is too numerous to mention. We couldn't begin to catalog his legacy. I would mention two of them to you, though, in this discussion of legacy left to a family. Do you remember that the time Jesus prayed all night and his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray? And what was the legacy Jesus left them? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The legacy of the Lord's Prayer is the legacy, one of the legacies Jesus left us because of that query. Another legacy Jesus left us, and again, it's one of just an innumerable host, is what Jesus did with the Passover. For thousands of years, the Passover had been a celebration of God's past goodness to Israel, an escape from Egypt. But there, in a Bethany home, in a little town outside Jerusalem, an upper room, Jesus celebrates the Passover with his disciples, and he changes it so radically that it can no longer be recognized as what it started out to be. His legacy was to change the Passover from being about God's deliverance from Egypt to being about himself. What was it he said there? As long as you do this, as often as you do this, do it in remembrance of Egypt. Do it in remembrance of Moses and the children of Israel. Do it in remembrance of me. His legacy was to change 2,000 years of religious history, to change its focus totally and center it on himself. Jesus' legacy is an awesome thing. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22 tells us that a wise man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. It's good to leave a legacy, whether a material one or a spiritual one, to your family. But not all legacies are good. For instance, David left a legacy to Samuel, and it's a bitter legacy. David's legacy to Samuel said, before David died, he called Samuel into a council, and he said, "Now listen to me." David said to Solomon. David said to Solomon, "Listen to me. I want you to kill Joab and kill Shimei." And David's legacy to Solomon was to involve him in murder. That's a pretty difficult legacy. You can talk about Eli's legacy to his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and the mayhem they caused among the people of God. Jacob has a terrible legacy with his family. Jacob's family is divided by jealousy, by strife. It's an unhappy family, a dysfunctional family. There's rape, there's murder, there's incest, there's all kinds of struggles in Jacob's family. His legacy is not a good one. Bill Gates made this comment about legacy. He said, "Legacy is stupid. I don't want to leave a legacy." God makes this comment about legacy. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 18, he says, "The sins of the father are visited upon the sons to the third and fourth generation." You see, you will have a legacy. It'll be a good one or a bad one, but Bill Gates doesn't have the choice of not having one. He's going to have one. And you and I are going to have a legacy in the lives of our families. There is a New Testament character, one that has a tremendous legacy for his family. He's well known to you. He's an exciting New Testament character. All of us love him. All of us know him. And we're so impressed with him. But we rarely think about him in terms of legacy. Sometimes a diamond sparkles with such fire and blazes with such beauty and majesty that we don't see the different facets of it. Such it is with this New Testament character. This one who leaves a legacy. I'll refer to him as the faithful father. You may know him as the father of the prodigal son. And from the story of the prodigal son, we will see the legacy of the faithful father. I brought a picture of the faithful father I thought I would show you. And here it is. It's by Rembrandt. And Rembrandt's a master of the use of light. And in the use of light, Rembrandt focuses this reunion between the prodigal and the father on the father's face. The light falls full there. Off to the sides, the elder brother looking with some judgmental sense of criticism, a servant looking on, but the focus is on the father, kneeling before the father. There is the prodigal, dressed in his rags with his broken sandal. The focus is on the faithful father. He is leaving a legacy. So what I'd like to do is just point out the legacy of the faithful father in the story of the prodigal son. Now, because I know the group to whom I am preaching this afternoon, and I know that you are members of a church where the Bible is taught completely and with great integrity, you know the story of the prodigal son. And so, given your understanding of it, let me just speak to you about the legacy of the faithful father. The first, and I believe one of the most significant legacies ever left to anyone, is left by the faithful father to his family, and it is the ironclad inevitability of consequences. We don't think of that as a legacy, but it is invaluable. The faithful father is portrayed as a wise and powerful and wealthy individual. But notice that he allows the consequences of the prodigal son's sin to have their full effect. He must have known where the prodigal lay in the pig pen. He must have had contacts in that distant country. He must have had friends who would check on the prodigal. But he leaves the prodigal in the pig pen, reaping what he has sown. This is a rare thing. It is extremely rare in our society that we would leave to our families a legacy of the nature of consequences. He could have interrupted this and enabled the prodigal to clean up and get a fresh start and return to some other pig pen, but he did not interrupt the inevitability of the consequences. And it's not just the prodigal sinfulness that the consequences affect. There is a legacy of this concept of supply and demand or cause and effect that seem to flow through the story. The certain consequences of legalism, for instance, in the elder brother is going to be loneliness. He's going to be left out of the party because of his legalism. And if you live a legalistic life, you can expect to ultimately lead a lonely life. It is a consequence. I think the Father was bestowing this legacy of cause and effect on His children throughout their lifetimes. And I'll tell you why I think that. I think that because when the prodigal runs out of money, when the prodigal runs out of friends, when the prodigal runs out of a cushy lifestyle, he does not get up and go back to the Father. He has learned something in his life that he's about to apply. He's learned that if he will work, he will have resources. And so what does the prodigal do when all of his money's gone? Run back to the Father and ask for more money? No. He goes and gets a job. He thinks he'll reform himself. He thinks that in just a little bit he'll be in charge of all the pig pens in that country. He thinks that in just a little bit he'll rise up in the profession of and become an overseer of pig pens or something to that effect. But he's not depending on his Father. He's depending on his effort. You only learn to do that through cause and effect. Think about it a moment. Where do we first see the elder brother? What is he doing when we first meet him? Well, he's in the field working, is he not? He too has learned this concept of cause and effect, that labor yields resources. And there he comes in out of the field. I believe that this is put into the DNA of these two boys by the legacy of the faithful father. Despite their sins, they had learned the law of cause and effect. People who never learned this seem to always blame others for their problems. They always whine about their problems. They move from pig pen to pig pen. I have a friend who told me about an interview with his father. My friend said, he said, I was a college student and I had begun to depart to my own far country and begun to leave behind the responsibilities and morality that I grew up with in my family. I began to use alcohol like I shouldn't use it, and I began to live a life that I was embarrassed of. He said, but my dad knew about it. He said, one day my dad called me to the side. He said to me, son, you're old enough to make the decisions you're making, but you were trained not to make these. He said, I have to tell you this. He said, if you're in a car wreck, if you're arrested, if the way you're living causes you serious crisis, he said, the Father said to me, you cannot call me. He said, I have taught you what you need to do, and you cannot call me when you reap the consequences of your behavior. Now, to some of you that sounds harsh, but to me that sounds wise. You see, that father was giving my friend the clarity of understanding you will meet the consequences of your sin yourself. That is the way the world works. And it is a great blessing when you leave a legacy to your family of understanding this ironclad law of the universe, the law of consequences. Sleeping in will cost you your job. Ignoring your spouse will cost you your marriage. I pastored a lady who told me about problems in her son's marriage and how after 3 or 4 years of marriage, her son showed up at her home one day and said, "Mom, my wife and I are having trouble. I just need to come back home for a little while, have a place to cool off." My church member said to me, "Pastor, I told him to get out of my yard." She said, "I told him that, son, when you say I do, you did. Now you married this lady. You live with the consequences." That marriage, after some 40 years, is still a strong and happy marriage because that couple learned the law of sowing and reaping, the law of consequences. There is a second legacy that is left to this man's family, and that is the priority of family relationships. And I know what you're thinking. Well, duh, that's what the thing's about, right? Well, don't take it too quickly. I brought another picture for you. This one is a Norman Rockwell picture of a very happy family. And I don't think the prodigal son's or the faithful father's family would have been portrayed by this picture. Norman Rockwell shows this beautiful picture of a family at a Thanksgiving feast, but I don't think this family was like this. I think it may be more like this next picture I brought for you. You see, we get 3 pictures of the faithful father interacting with his son, 3 encounters, and 2 of them are marked by conflict. Maybe his family looked more like the second picture I've shown you of the 2 young ladies who are having difficulty together. It is hard for parents of family members to stress upon them the significance of the family relationship. But it is an important legacy to leave. Listen to the pathos in the words of the faithful father in Luke 15, verse 31. As he's remonstrating with the elder brother and trying to get him to be reconciled to his prodigal brother. He says, my child. Literally, the Greek translation is my baby, little one, darling, sweetheart. It's this term of affection. Do you see what he's done? In the heart of the father, now the elder brother is the prodigal. And he's responding to the prodigal responding to the elder brother like he responded to the prodigal. Tremendous passion for the family. My child, you have always been with me. This brother of yours, he's appealing to him. Respond to your brother. Now, we're not told about the mother in this story. Perhaps she'd gone on to be with the Lord. Perhaps she was watching from the kitchen window as the father and the elder brother had their interview on the back porch. But we can say with some degree of confidence that parents love their children because they love their spouse. And indeed, the most magnificent legacy a daughter can receive is to see the devotion of her mother to her dad, and to see in her father the gracious way that he deals with her mother. And that provides for her a model for a husband. The richest legacy a son can receive is the example of how a father or how a husband should behave toward a wife. Sadly, we often learn this too late, but we never learn it too late to pass on. I am doing an interim at First Baptist Camden, South Carolina. a historic church, more than 210 years old, in a Revolutionary War center in outside Columbia, South Carolina. Historic place, very interesting for me and for Patty. And I recently was involved in a funeral during one of the COVID surges, and it was a patriarch of a family in the church. We gathered at the graveside, and all of the family members were there, and all of the family members were scheduled to speak at the graveside. I stood there like I wasn't tired, standing in the sun for a long time, but I listened to these people talk about this father and grandfather and father-in-law that had died. It was really instructive when it comes to leaving a legacy. Not one of them said a word about how much they loved the man who had died. They never mentioned missing him. They never mentioned the empty place he was going to leave at the table. They never mentioned what Christmas was going to be like without him. Do you know what every one of them said as person after person came to the microphone and spoke? Every one of them said, he loved us. Every one of them said, I was his favorite. Person after person. Even the son-in-laws said, I was his favorite. They talked about how much they experienced his love. There's the legacy. To be able to leave to your family your devotion to the family itself. What a tremendous legacy. Let me give you a third legacy that the faithful father left, and that is he left a legacy of restoration. I brought a picture of a tremendous restoration project going on in Notre Dame Cathedral. Many of you, like I, have been inside Notre Dame and marveled at the beauty and the architecture and the wonder of it. It looks different today with this earth-moving equipment sitting in the midst of the sanctuary. But restoration is important. So important that even something like Notre Dame needs to be restored. Restoration is hard work. It's intentional. It's not accidental. And it's difficult in terms of relationships. There is a story that I heard years ago from my mentor in the ministry who told about a deacon in a church who was estranged from another deacon. And one of these deacons became deathly ill. He was on his deathbed. He was going to die. The pastor knew that he should effect some sort of restoration. And so he went to the healthy deacon and he said, you know, Brother Jones is about to die, and you don't want him to leave this world with offense against you, and you don't want him to die, and you and him be estranged from one another. Let's go see him. Let's make up. Let's patch things up. Well, the deacon agreed that was a good idea, and together they called on the invalid, Brother Jones, and the pastor introduced and the subject to him. He said, Brother Jones, you're sick and you may not make it much longer. And you don't need to go out of this world resenting your brother deacon. And I just want to ask you both to resolve your differences and patch things up. Well, these two deacons cried, they wept, they hugged each other, they forgave each other, they talked about how good that each other, the other was, and it was a great thing. And the pastor felt very pleased with himself. And as they turned to leave the sick room, to leave the invalid to his eventual demise, the sick man raised up on the bed and said, Preacher? The pastor turned around, Yes, sir. He said, Listen, if I get better, it's all off, you hear? Restoration is a difficult thing. And a legacy of restoration can be hard work, but it's Christ-like work. My mother taught me to read from the Bible. I didn't read from a reader in first grade. before I'd ever seen the inside of a schoolroom, I had been taught to read, beginning at the Sermon on the Mount. And the 9th verse of the Sermon on the Mount says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." Restoration of relationships is what Jesus Christ does, and it's what a person leaves as a legacy to a family. The prodigal son is a person who's restored. The restoration is figured in the robe, the ring, and the sandals. The robe covering the filth and scars of the pig pen, the wounds and the emaciated condition of the prodigal restores to the prodigal some respectability. The ring, emphasizing his place in the family, bearing perhaps a family crest, restores to the prodigal authority. And the sandal, only slaves went barefooted. The sandal restores something else entirely. The sandals restore autonomy. They make it possible for the prodigal to leave again. But restoring the family is a tremendous legacy. And it's just not just a matter of restoration with the prodigal. There's restoration with the elder brother. It's interesting when the elder brother begins to be estranged from the father went out to him. Now, when the prodigal is yet a long way off, what does the father do? He goes out to the prodigal. Here he's going out to the elder brother. He's committed to the restoration of broken relationships in his family. He is involved in restoring the relationship not just between the prodigal and himself. No, that's only part of the restoration. The full restoration comes when the prodigal is restored to the elder brother. And it's the legacy the father is going to leave this family. I think I've been preaching since back before the earth's crust cooled. And I've preached a bunch of sermons. But the greatest compliment I ever received from a sermon that I preached came from a person I'd never met before. Monday morning, I was in a little mom and pop grocery store where one of the ladies in that grocery store cooked biscuits and sausage for pulpwood truck drivers that drove through that community to stop and buy. And every Monday I'd go down and I would have a biscuit and sausage with my deacon that ran that grocery store. And this day, the guy delivering Coca-Colas came into the grocery store and recognized me and asked me to step outside with him. We'd never met, he said, but he had sat in on my last Sunday's sermon. He said, "Preacher, I had not talked to my sister in years since our mother died. We had fallen out. We'd become estranged. And after hearing you preach, I called my sister and we patched it up. Things are good between us now." Restoration is a wonderful thing. Now, let me give you the last legacy he leaves, and that's the legacy of celebration. It is a legacy that is a strange one. In verse 23, 24, and 25, we read that there's good food, good music, good fellowship. The prodigal son wants to celebrate. The father wants to celebrate with neighbors. When you think about this isn't a parable by itself. Jesus introduces 3 parables and calls them one parable. And you've got the woman who lost the coin. She celebrates with the neighbors when she finds it. The shepherd who lost the sheep, he celebrates with the neighbors when he finds it. The prodigal son comes home. The father celebrates with the neighbors when the prodigal son comes home. There's a sense of celebration. There's great joy. That's often a challenge for us who work hard or who've been brought up by parents from the Great Depression, but sometimes we must join with our Cajun brothers and sisters and just say, laissez le bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. That's what the Father is doing in this passage. I have not mentioned my father to you, but I had the privilege of being his pastor, interim pastor, in his last months of life. My mother was in a nursing home. She would die shortly after that. My father was going down, and he went through what psychologists called a life review, and he began to talk to me about his life. He said to me, I didn't ask about regrets, but he said he had a regret. His regret was that he had worked so hard. He said, I didn't have to work that hard. I didn't have to work you boys that hard. We could have taken more vacations. We could have gone more places. We could have had more fun. He said, I wish we'd have had more fun. My brothers and I don't regret anything about our dad. We love him. We respect him. He is like Anchises, riding on our shoulder, whispering in our ears. But he regretted it. The faithful father left 4 legacies. He left an understanding of cause and effect. He left a commitment to the family. He left restoration, and he left celebration. Let me conclude with 2 final thoughts. You can leave a legacy to your family, and you should, and it should be a good one, but you cannot make them claim it. Rudyard Kipling's magnificent poem on the prodigal son suggests that the prodigal went back to the pig pen. I hope he didn't. I hope Kipling was wrong. But if he did go back to the pig pen, he went back in spite of what the father's legacy left him. There's a final word I'd give you on it, and that is the greatest legacy you can leave is the direction that you go. Your family someday will gather around your coffin, and they need to know where you've gone. They need to understand that you've gone to heaven, and they need to understand how to get there. Adam's a man that I'm witnessing to. He's 38 years old. During the COVID virus, his mother died in a hospital by herself, totally alone. While his mother was dying, his father died of the virus in his home, totally alone. Adam is racked with guilt. As he's talked in my office, I asked him, Adam, were your parents Christians? Oh, yes, he said. I know they're in heaven. They were involved in their church. They received Christ. They were baptized. My mother, he said, even left me a letter. Left a letter to me. She couldn't see me, but she could write me a letter. And she told me about how she wanted to see me in heaven. Adam, I asked, are you a Christian? He hung his head. No, he said, I'm not. You know where your parents have gone, don't you, Adam? Yes. Then I asked Adam about his 3 children. Adam, are they going to follow you where you go? Then if that's the case, you want to follow your parents where they've gone. The greatest legacy you can give your family is to be the frontiersman, blazing the trail to your home in glory, leaving it clear so they can follow. Let me close this time in prayer. Father, thank you for the privilege of giving, you've given us to leave something to our families. Help us to leave the right things. Thank you for the example of the prodigal son and for his faithful father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Again, I want to say a heartfelt thanks to Dr. Don Moore and Dr. Emil Turner. what godly wisdom they have shared with us tonight on the importance of building a godly legacy and how to leave that legacy to our families. I hope that it's challenged you, and I hope that it's given you a lot of food for thought. You know, as we think about families, following up on Dr. Turner's remarks, I wanted to just mention two new things that are going to be coming in 2021 here in our legacy ministries that hopefully will help you as you seek to build that legacy to your family. First of all, we'll have our legacy marriage seminar. And we're so excited about this. You know, there are very few resources out there and very few seminars or conferences that deal with the unique problems that we face in the 55 plus years. Problems of, you know, the empty nest, moving toward retirement and then experiencing retirement, being together way more than we've been since we dated. There are just so many issues, learning to care for elderly parents and how that affects our relationship. We want to tackle head on those issues that we're all facing. Divorce rates are climbing in the 55 plus area, and we want to make sure that in Immanuel, we're preparing and we're overcoming with godly principles to deal with each of those. I also want to mention something very exciting, and that will be our Legacy Grandparenting Conference. There is such a great need for us to be godly grandparents as our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will face obstacles and challenges that we never had to. But we can be the godly example to lead them through and even to help them through those times. And so we're going to be trying to address some of those issues and lay some very practical groundwork for how to be a godly grandparent. We're also going to be that weekend looking into the possibility of doing an adopt a grandchild or adopt a grandparent weekend. We have so many children here in our church that don't have grandparents here locally. And I know so many of my friends in our legacy group would love to have a child to invest in because they don't have grandchildren of their own. We're going to be working on that. That'll be an exciting component. So you'll want to look forward to those two meetings in the course of this year. We don't have dates yet. We're waiting to firm that up as we see how COVID moves through the year. But you'll see more about that later. Two great opportunities to expand building your legacy with those that you love the most. I want to thank you for joining us tonight and for being a part of this very first Legacy Conference. But I want to remind you that it is not over. We will begin again in the morning at 9 o'clock, and we look forward to tackling even more topics on how to build our legacy in different areas of our life. In the morning, we're going to be blessed by our pastor, Dr. Stephen Smith, who will lead us addressing the issue of how do I leave my legacy to my church. I think it's going to be so important. We're also going to take a moment and look at how do I build my legacy to the world? What are the things I can do through missional living that not only impact those I'm ministering to, but all those who are watching me, whether it's friends, Sunday school class members, family. We are laying by our example a legacy into their lives. And so you're not going to want to miss our next session of the Legacy Conference. Let me close this night in prayer. Would you join me as we pray? Dear God, we thank you so much for all that you've spoken to us tonight. We thank you for your word that never fails, that leads us day by day into doing exactly what you need us to do and what you desire for us to do. Lord, give us the wisdom now to answer your call, to move forward and to build legacies that will impact not only the next generation, but generation after generation. Thank you, Lord, for investing in us during this time. And thank you for Dr. Moore and Dr. Turner who have led us tonight. We ask it all in your name and for your sake. Amen. Well, may God bless you tonight. And I look forward to seeing you in the morning as we continue Immanuel's 2021 Legacy Conference.